Tony, I interviewed you for the first and last time almost 2 years ago. I know that a lot of things have changed since then in relation to drugs policy in Ireland, both in relation to government and in relation to your organisation. Could you fill our listeners in on how changed the situation is in relation to drugs policy in Ireland today compared to 2 years ago? You don't have to, but you might like to start off by telling us the latest news about drugs injection rooms.
Okay, yeah. So the supervised injection facilities legislation was passed the 16th of May 2017. Minister Byrne, who has responsibility for the National Drug Strategy, had seen it, the legislation through both houses of the Dáil, the Seanad and the Oireachtas, and there was no changes made to the legislation, so there was a lot of support for that legislation, and it got through, and we were very happy when it got through, and that was May last year. And then there was a process, a public procurement process by the HSE to decide on who would deliver the service, the pilot service. Merchants Key Island is the preferred bidder, and we're 100% behind them. We're just waiting for that to open, really. There's a bit of work to be done before that opens, but the sooner the better. So that's where that's at, and there's it's very important still. In Dublin, you still have people injecting in the public domain. I was only the other afternoon. I was in the laneways looking again myself. It's still a very big issue for Dublin. So the sooner it opens, the better. So that's the supervised injection facility. The other thing that happens from a drug policy perspective was that the National Drug Strategy was launched last year. And that is a very important document from the government, which very much recognises the importance of a health-led approach to drug use, to make sure that there's a rehabilitative approach, a harm-reducing and rehabilitative approach to the issue of drug use. So that was to be welcomed. And I suppose the pilot injecting room is mentioned in there, and there's a number of things in the National Drug Strategy that cover everything from treatment and rehabilitation to supply control, demand control. It's a big document. The two big pieces, I suppose, are the fact that the pilot supervised injection facility is very firmly in there, and also that they have established a working group on the issue of the possession of drugs for personal use. To look at alternative responses to possession of drugs for personal use, and that working group was established in November of 2017, and they are to report back to the minister within 12 months. So by the end of this year, they are to report back to the minister with their recommendations. So that's a very critical piece for us.
Do we have a time frame on how many of the injection facilities rooms are going to open, Tony, and when and where?
Okay, so the time frame is, well, the last official time frame is before the end of the year to open up at Merchants Quay project on Merchants Quay in Dublin. That's the pilot service, the first supervised injection facility. However, that's an 18-month pilot, and then depending on the outcome of the evaluation of that pilot, we would hope, obviously, that the services will be allowed to apply and provide a service. It's you can imagine services that work with people who are injecting drug users do want to apply. So, for example, down in Cork City, they have very clearly recognised the local drugs task force in Cork has very clearly recognised and stated that they want to provide an injecting room in Cork City. They have to wait until the pilot is evaluated before they can proceed. So that's one example, and I know of other examples. And I think what we want to see is supervised injection facilities where they are needed. So certainly, obviously, Merchants Quay will provide one on the south side of the city, but there is a need on the north side of the city as well. So we are looking forward to perhaps applying for a license in the future, and I know that other services are waiting for that pilot to be evaluated. So it's critical that we get the one open, the first one open, and then get that evaluated as quickly as possible.
It's great. It's great to hear, Tony. It's great to be made aware. It's great to be made aware that big changes are happening. We come back to the public consultation in a couple of minutes or a few minutes.
Sure.
You and Ana Liffey have a big campaign called "Safer from Harm" now, don't you?
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah. So we're working with Hot Press magazine and London School of Economics on organising some town hall events around the country to explain to people what the criminalisation of drugs for personal use is and isn't. And it's a real engagement piece that is complements the national drug strategy working group looking at this very issue, that we're able, because we do believe that there should be a change in how we respond to people who are in the possession of drugs. And I should explain a little bit more. So we currently work under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1977, which basically underpins all our prohibition laws around drugs. Unfortunately, as people will know, we now have a much bigger problem with drugs in Ireland. Drugs are more freely available. 41 years later, they are more freely available. They are cheaper than ever. They're more potent than ever. And there's a lot more harms associated to drug use. And really, the war on drugs has failed. So we know that particularly from the Portuguese experience, where they have decriminalised drugs in Portugal for the last 17 years, we know that they've had great outcomes, and see that replicated in Irish context as soon as possible, really. So that means that instead of somebody who is caught in possession of drugs going to court, going through the criminal justice system, they will be offered an intervention. May well be fined, a small fine, because drugs would still remain illegal. It's just that it wouldn't be treated as a criminal justice issue up in the courts. It would be dealt with as a health issue. Any crimes like drug dealing would still remain a criminal justice issue. It's just a smarter way to address the issue, because drug use is a health issue. And so we are advocating very strongly and working with other agencies like Citywide and the Peter McVerry Trust and other civil society organisations like the National Family Support Network, who all support this approach. And we're confident that if the working group, when it sees the evidence, that they will realise that hopefully this would work in Ireland as well.
So it's great that the public consultation by the Department of Health at the moment is on the same kind of topic, isn't it? Yes.
So the Department of Health had a online consultation, which is open until the 13th of July. And people can go online. If you were to simply do a search for Department of Health consultations, you will find the top it will be that link. You go in there, you will find a consultation about alternative approaches to the possession of use, and you can do this survey and tell them what you think should be the response to that issue. So I would thoroughly recommend to people and encourage people to engage with that survey, because they've had a really good response. Last time I heard, they've had over 14,000 responses to this issue, to this survey, which is the highest level of responses to such a consultation in the history of the state, as I understand it. And that's great, because it means that people are really interested in this. Drugs is a very, very big issue for Ireland. We have in terms of the indicators around, the increases in drug use amongst young people in the last number of years, the high levels of ecstasy use and opiate use. We have a real problem with drugs in Ireland, and we need to manage the situation better. And I think this is a great opportunity for people to inform the government what they think. So I really strongly recommend they engage with that survey.
It's great if there is going to be change over the next year or two or period of time. Moving to a health-led approach would be brilliant,
I know, yeah.
It's particularly after all the years of the war against drug. It's gone on for so long. And I mean, like you were saying, it started about 40 years ago or something, didn't it?
Yeah, so in terms of our legislation, the Misuse of Drugs Act 1977, that's the underpinning legislation for prohibition in Ireland. But I think, when we look back at the Dáil debates from that time, around that were debating the Misuse of Drugs Act, we find that politicians of the day did recognise that people who had an addiction that required, a health response, and that there were, and that their crimes were to be treated somewhat differently, as it were. And I'll give you an example of that. At the fifth stage Dáil debate on the 31st of March 1977, in the Dáil then spokesperson on health, Fianna Fáil, Mr. Charles Haughey, said, "We have had to try to bring in legislation that would render certain acts punishable, but we have had to recognise that very often people committing these offences are not guilty of criminal activity in the normal sense, but perhaps are people who require medical care and attention rather than punishment." And I think that was one example where our politicians of the day really did realise that this was a complex issue and that drug use is a health issue rather than a criminal justice one. And I don't think that, drug use back then was very much contained to certain areas, particularly in Dublin. And I think if those communities back then realised that we were going to have more problems with drugs, and that actually the Misuse of Drugs Act was going to compound some of those problems around drug use, I think they would have asked their politicians to look again and to consider what they were proposing. So I think we have an opportunity now to address these issues that have come to light over the years, these unintended consequences of the Misuse of Drugs Act in terms of drug use.
I won't keep you much longer, Tony. I know you're very busy. Just to talk about the Act in 77, am I right in saying that the heroin problem really started in Ireland and Dublin first? Was after that came in, or was it a similar time, or what?
It was around a similar time. So in the late 70s, there were people a small group of people using heroin, but by the 80s, the early 80s, Ireland had a very, particularly north in the city, Dublin, we had a very serious problem with heroin, and then of course we had the HIV/AIDS epidemic, a global epidemic that meant that there was very serious problems, health problems emerging for people who were injecting drugs sort of around 83, 84, 85. And I'm very proud to say that Ana Liffey was one of the early responders to that problem, and we're still here in 2018 working with people who use drugs. So the problem, we know that the problem has only got worse. Harm reduction does work, treatment and rehabilitation does work, and we need to expand upon that in our response, a health-led response to the issue of possession of drugs for personal use.
So when that Act came in 77, it wasn't expected that the drug use was going to get so much worse, yeah?
I don't think people could have imagined how complex drug use was going to become. We've had all sorts of trends over the years. Heroin was the drug of choice, the problem drug back then. It still is a big problem, but now we have benzodiazepines, we have new psychoactive substances. We have Lyrica, or pregabalin, I should say, and other substances that are being misused. We have a poly-drug use problem in Ireland, not just in Dublin, but right across the country, from Dublin to Limerick to Galway to Cork to Drogheda to all around the country. We have a very, very serious problem with substance use. So it's not without hope. We can change what we're doing and manage the situation better. We can reduce the problem, but I'm afraid at this stage we simply cannot solve drug use in Ireland. We can manage the situation better, and we can reduce many of the harms that we see from day to day.
Just to finish up, is there any other information you would like to get across to our listeners, Tony, in relation to how anyone listening can get involved and support your work?
Sure. Well, we're on social media. So we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we're on Instagram. And if you were to look up the hashtag Safer from Harm, you will find a lot of posts around this very issue. If you visit saferfromharm.ie, you can sign up for a newsletter, and we'll send out we'll be sending out updates on the work we're doing.